Here she is.
Hi, how are you? I was just figuring out
Hey.
how to unmute myself.
Morning, Jen.
Oh, the tech stuff. Hey, cool. Let's kick off. So welcome everybody to the second time that we have the fabulous Jen Baird, the CEO from REINZ, here to talk to us about the current state of the property market, housing market in New Zealand. I'm joined today with my colleague Frances Kane, who's a sales exec here at ReLab, and my name is Lou Donnelly-Davey, for those of you that don't know me, and I take care of marketing here at ReLab. So without further ado, let's kick off. So welcome, Jen. Thank you very much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and we look forward to diving deep into some of these curly questions. We've got a ton of people on today. I see people from up and down the country. Actually popped a poll into the chat on the side as well. So if you want to just let us know where you're from, that'd be great as well. So Frankie, let's dive right in, and I'll hand over the reins to you to start us off.
Cheers. Thank you for the introduction, Lou, and good morning, Jen, and all of our guests as well. I guess a good place to start would just be a bit of a background on REINZ, Jen. We know that you guys have been helping the real estate community, New Zealand market, and agents for over 100 years. So just a quick insight into how and why you guys came about.
Yeah, sure. So actually, interestingly, the picture behind me on the wall just went up. A few weeks ago, we found it in storage, and it is a photograph of the very first ever Real Estate Institute conference, and it was held in my hometown, Hamilton, quite a long time before I was born, in 1926. So this is an organisation that's been around for a really long time and had its genesis really in the early 1900s, when land agents across the country started having conversations with each other about how they could create a consistent set of policies for when land was being transacted in this new place. And so that's how it started. And then there was the Land Agents Act in 1912, maybe 1912, I think it was 1912 or 1914. And that really solidified sort of a legal pathway for how land agents would roll in this country. And from there, REINZ sort of, got bigger and bigger as the industry really changed. Obviously there's been an enormous amount of change since then in how real estate is transacted and what real estate even looks like in this country. And REINZ, now has a really similar role to what it would have had back then, connecting real estate professionals together, thinking about the collective good. Like, there is a lot of things that all real estate agents in New Zealand, regardless of whether they're selling rural, commercial, residential land, need to understand. And our role really is to build a strong foundation under all of them, so that they're well supported, that we speak with one voice to the government as well, so that the government of the day understands the challenges, not just for their profession, but for our customers as well, more importantly. But we now also have an education business, do enormous amounts of training. Well over a third of all of the CPD for real estate agents is done through REINZ now, and we have a data and digital business as well.
Oh, wow, that's absolutely incredible. How many members do you have now, Jen?
Well, we have about 17,500 members. So 97% of all licensed real estate professionals in New Zealand are members of ours. And then we have a fast growing group of members who are in the property management category as well.
Oh, fantastic. That's really cool to get that background, and that photo behind you is incredible. Love a wee close up of that later on. If we can maybe try and zoom in. We'll see how we go. Hey, let's turn to some trends and some figures. So you guys have just released your March 23 figures. Super interesting reading. How do they compare to previous years? And what sort of trends are you seeing emerging in the housing market?
Well, it depends on which year you want me to compare it to, of course. But if we compare it year on year, it's down about 13%. compared to the same time last year. And I think what's interesting, we always do this year-on-year comparison, and when you look at the numbers we were talking about even just a few months ago around that comparison, the year-on-year number is getting smaller, which says that the fall in prices is starting to ease, and that's certainly something that we're starting to see in those month-on-month numbers as well. But the 13% nationally belies the fact that those two big markets, Auckland and Wellington, have really felt the full force of those falls. With considerably larger year-on-year falls. I think Auckland down about 17%. And Wellington a bit more than that.
Right. And I guess something we've been wondering as well, I work quite closely with a lot of real estate agents. The return to normal stock levels for properties for sale, how do you think that will affect buyers and also sellers?
Yeah, everybody looks at the highline numbers, right? What is the prices doing? But there's some really interesting data at the moment, and one of them is exactly what you just pulled out, that the inventory levels now are around about the long-term average. It has been a really long time since that was the case. I mean, when I first started my job nearly 2 years ago, we were talking about historically low stock levels. I think the lowest we got to was about 13,000 properties for sale in the country, which is staggering, really. When we're looking at 29,000, we all think that's a heap, but actually that's around about the long-term average. So that means that there is a lot of choice for buyers. I think the challenge at the moment, the thing that everybody's feeling, is this cautiousness in the market, right? So things are a bit slower. So there's not a whole load of transactions happening. So that turnover isn't, we're not really seeing that turnover, and that's the challenging part. That's what makes it feel a bit slow, but the numbers are really normal. What we are not seeing, though, is a whole load of new stock come to market. So if you imagine a world in which a whole load of buyers decided now is the perfect time, and they went and went, right, we're in, we're buying, they would hoover up that stock pretty quickly. And because the new listings are quite substantially down in pretty much everywhere in the country, we could potentially start to see those inventory levels fall. And the inventory levels obviously make up the supply side of the supply and demand equation. So you look at the numbers in Auckland in particular, there's 1.8% less properties on the market last month than there were in March last year. So actually inventory levels in Auckland falling. It'll be interesting to see which other regions follow suit in the next few months.
Oh, I just put myself on mute instead of taking myself off mute. So Jen, that's super interesting. And I wonder if those inventory levels do fall, I mean, given that the interest rates are still very high and the OCR probably is going to move again, do you think that will affect prices up or down, or do you think that things will still remain the same?
Yeah, like there's so many moving pieces. So many moving pieces. I mean, any year one economist will tell you that if something changes in the supply and demand equation, then fundamentally prices will change, right? But unfortunately, we're not just dealing with inventory levels. We are dealing with interest rates. I just saw the inflation rate has been released this morning at 6.7% annual inflation, which is lower than expectations. So that's a good sign for the economy in general, and that it's starting to look like inflation might be easing down. That sends the right kind of message to the Reserve Bank. So when they're thinking about whether they will or will not increase interest rates, that's a key number for them. So that being better than normal, who knows what they'll decide to do in the coming months. They have signaled quite strongly that there's another rise coming. So, we've already started to see interest rates continue to ease up, and both buyers and sellers expecting that to be the case, and that to be the case for the foreseeable. That is the thing that really has the impact on the market. But we're also in this really interesting year where we don't just have inflation and interest rates, we also have migration coming back at levels that are unexpected. So more people moving to New Zealand than had been expected. I mean, that has a demand side impact. And of course it's election year, and for people who've been in the industry for a wee while, we all know that weirdly, New Zealanders just put the brakes on decision making in an election year.
Yeah, they so do. We are all quietly cautious as Kiwis, aren't we?
Yep.
Hey, you've touched a little bit on interest rates, but let's dive a little bit deeper into that. How are the rising interest rates and the increased cost of living affecting New Zealand housing market? And how can we, as buyers or sellers, what can we do to mitigate those factors a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, interest rates are like the fundamental piece of the puzzle here. So for anybody who doesn't have $800,000 in a bag at the back of their wardrobe waiting to buy a property, we're talking to banks about borrowing that money. And so it's a fundamental lever in the real estate equation. The other thing, though, that I think in the last year that we've seen that has really had an impact, as well as the increasing numbers, is the number of changes and the pace of those changes. So we've seen, I think it's 10 or 11 consecutive increases. Month after month after month after month, those numbers have gone up. And that's been really unusual. We've not seen that before. And what we know is that it's the uncertainty caused by those changes. So historically, what we would see is, an interest rate change happens, and for the couple of weeks afterwards, the market goes, oh, what does that mean? Oh, I have to redo my numbers. Oh, I've redone my numbers. Oh, I can still buy that property. Great. Off I go again. And we're fine. But when, people take that 2 weeks and then they go, oh, I wonder if there's going to be another increase. And then there is. And so they take another 2 weeks and then there's another increase. It's that uncertainty that has added to the cautiousness. And so what some of the other commentators in the market are starting to see is people going, oh, well, actually, I'm feeling like interest rates might be about to plateau. They might be about to stay around where they are now for a wee while. And once I get my head around those numbers and I've done those equations, I can make some choices that will sustain me and be legit for a few months. And so that enables me to sort of build some comfort levels. This is all just psychology, right? And that's the challenging part. So it'll be very interesting to see if we start to see people go, okay, I'm okay at this level, therefore I will buy. I mean, absolutely no question. We are certainly faced with a whole load of people looking at those numbers going, I cannot, not with, all the other costs that are increasing and the uncertainty potentially around my job. It's the affordability equations that people do, needing to stabilize for them to actually feel comfortable making calls.
And that's super interesting that you say that. Our guest that we had on last week, commentator Ashley Church, he said the very same thing. He said it's not necessarily going to be that interest rates go down, but it's going to be, buyers and sellers having that degree of certainty that they feel like they know that the Reserve Bank perhaps has stopped. I mean, the rhetoric out there is that they're going to go one more time in May, which, we all sort of feel like that's going to happen. And whether that's 0.25 or 5 or, we don't know. And that will most likely, as you've said, dampen down inflation even more. And if we're going in the right direction already, we were, I think, about 7, weren't we? And now we're at about 6.7. I think you said ideally they want to get to about 3. But Ashley was saying that, it's not necessarily about interest rates coming down, but it's about certainty, and it's about knowing that, okay, this is where we're at. Things are probably not going to get too much worse right now. I can deal with that. I know what my budget is. I know what my salary is. I can see where food prices are right now. I can see where all my other moving components are, and having that level of certainty in the market. Echoing exactly the same rhetoric that others have been.
Well, I'm pleased that Ashley Church agrees with me. That's great.
Well,
look, the other part of this too is that we all know, well, because we are in this market, right? We know real estate. We know that this too will pass. We are not going to be where we are forever, in the same way that although we hoped we would be a couple of years ago there forever, we're not. This too will pass. And so once you get to that point where people can go, all right, well, interest rates are where they are now. That's what it's going to cost me. I've potentially got to be able to deal with this for 18 months, 2 years, whatever. I can do that now. Potentially I'll get another pay rise next year. That'll make it a little bit easier. And then rates will start to come down. That'll be a little bit easier. And so it's that kind of longer term planning that certainty enables.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about how are the REINZ members adapting to this current economic climate. We've talked about buyers and sellers and interest rates and stuff, but how are the real estate agents dealing with this and coping?
Yeah, look, in lots of different ways, probably in really effective ways and in not very effective ways. I mean, I think this is a group of people who only earn a living if somebody else decides, yes, I will accept that price for my property. And it is hard yakka at the moment. But when I talk to experienced agents, what they're saying to me is that this is what real estate's all about, right? The last couple of years, they were the anomaly. The times that we're in now, where negotiation is important, where you have to do those hard yards in terms of really, I was going to say qualifying buyers, which is such a sales term, but really understanding where all of the buyers are at, where their levels really are at. Are they able to buy this property? What are the implications of that for them? Does that work for your vendor? Really understanding what people's motivations are, because those people coming to market to test the market, that's not really happening that much. And also from a real estate professional's perspective, they need to be working on business now that is going to get a result, both for their clients, because there is nothing worse than being a vendor and things churning and churning and churning, and nobody's actually telling you that the reason it's churning is because you want too much for your property. But from a real estate agent's perspective, you're essentially working for free until I, as the vendor, make that decision. And so, those conversations about what's really going on in the market, we're seeing an increase in the use of, market reports, data and stats, like a lot more appraisals happening around, and not appraisals for new listings, but revised appraisals for current properties that are on the market. As things change, your vendors need to know what is changing in their particular area. And we're seeing more and more agents, really sit down and make sure that their clients on both sides of the equation really understand that. And, when things are charging up like they were during the pandemic, you didn't really need to have that conversation. But when it's going the other direction, those conversations are harder, and there's a lot more of that type of, boots on the ground real estate work happening.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that leads perfectly into our next question. I know with REINZ, you guys have your house price index. Yeah. Could you maybe just elaborate or share a little bit about how it reflects the value of residential property? I know a bit of a longer question.
So that's fine. Now you just have to watch me try and explain the statistical tool. So the house price index seeks to measure the changing value of all of the property in the country. So when you talk about median sales price, that's just measuring the properties that changed hands in the previous month. But what the house price index does is it takes all of that information about what has been selling, overlays that across the entire stock in New Zealand, and says, well, on the basis of things changing in the way that they're changing for, whatever, 3-bedroom townhouses or whatever it is, if I overlay that on the whole of the stock of New Zealand, what changes are we seeing? And so that's the difference between the house price index and your sales price measure. And what the house price index is showing at the moment is very similar to what the median prices are showing. Are falling away in the prices on a year-on-year basis. I think what the house price index is really interesting when it starts to move away from the sales price trend, and what that tends to show us is that there are a certain type of property or a certain part of the market that's still strong and others are not so strong. So it's an interesting one to watch on that front.
That takes me nice wee segue into my next question, Jen. So how has the median sale price across most regions changed since January of this year? And what does that indicate about the state of the housing market?
Well, since January this year, it's edged up a little bit. I think it says more about what generally happens in January and February and March in the real estate market, as opposed to it being an anomaly. I mean, we tend to see slower sales months in January and in February. We generally see the median price go down in January and then pop back up through February and March, and we have seen that again this month, this year. So, but if I look back a bit further than that, what we are seeing is a slowing in the easing of those prices. So the falls are not as steep as they were, and the numbers that we see in March are looking a bit like that as well. I think the difference this year is that the sales volumes in February were challenged, shall we say.
Yeah.
And we've had a really good bounce back into March. So nearly 6,000 properties changing hands in New Zealand last month, which is a relatively good result. I mean, it's lower than the long-term average for March, but compared to where we have been from a sales perspective, there's green shoots in that. February in some fairly big markets, Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Waikato, Northland, was challenged by some pretty awful weather. And it's not just damage done by cyclones that slows the market. It's, a whole lot of rain and wind on a weekend. People don't want to go out. They don't go out. They don't see property. They don't sign agreements, and on it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, before I jump into my next question, we've got a couple more questions, and then we'll go to any questions that any of our audience might have. So if you have a question, please pop it in the channel on the right-hand side, and we'll get to that in 5 or so minutes. My last question, then I think Frankie's got one more for you as well. How do you see the New Zealand housing market evolving in the coming months, and what can buyers and sellers expect in terms of trends and activity? And now I know we've talked about interest rates and OCR and all that sort of stuff, and there's many different factors, but give us your best bet.
Outside of that, I think we're heading into the cooler months of an election year with some uncertainty around interest rates. I mean, I want to go and read all the commentary now about what people are saying about this inflation rate being lower than expected. I think that's a really positive sign. I'll be interested to see how positive economists and banks are feeling about that. Look, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think that the scale of the moving parts means that buyers and sellers are being really cautious. So, it is, from a real estate agent's perspective, it really is about knowing your numbers, knowing exactly what's going on, making sure your relationships are strong and you're staying in touch with people, because when they make that decision to sell, obviously you want them to get in touch with you. But it's the lower part of the property cycle.
Yeah, and we talk to a lot of real estate coaches, and they're always saying pipeline. Yeah. Make sure you've got people in your pipeline, and also we spoke to Jenny Bevan, who's a bit of a legend in Queenstown and a real estate salesperson down there, and he also said things about making sure that you're in the Facebook groups and all those different things around genuine interests and how you can genuinely help people. He says he's got a Hilux, and in winter he's out there with his winch and helping people out of ditches.
Oh my God! Are people driving into ditches all over Queenstown?
Absolutely. And he said that's the thing is, he genuinely wants to do that. He wants to be helpful. He's a really good bugger. But he said, and that just means that he's top of mind when that person comes to market, or when that person's father or wife or cousin or something comes to market. So
100%. And look, that stuff doesn't change. It doesn't matter what kind of market you're dealing with. That stuff it's the fundamentals of being a fantastic real estate agent, and fantastic real estate agents are in and of their communities. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, Frankie, I'll go to you for your last question, and then if anyone else has got any other questions, pop them in the chat.
Cool. Cheers. Thank you, Lou. Yeah, one last question, Jen, from me. Hey, just with the recent devastation, I know we touched on the bad weather, but with Cyclone Gabrielle, we saw parts of the North Island, the Coromandel, and also the Hawke's Bay. How did that cyclone affect the REINZ figures you guys released, or even just the market for February and March?
Yeah, well, actually, you can see in the figures in February, you can see a real a greater slowdown in the numbers in Auckland, Waikato, largely due to Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Northland, all of those areas underperforming the rest of the market. You can see that. And that's not because there was wholesale damage. Yes, there are properties being damaged, but it is because the bad weather keeps people at home. And also, the scale of that makes people really worried about what's going on. I guess if I think about the impact that it had in our industry for our members, property managers continue to be very busy, helping out a whole load of landlords and tenants who were really impacted by those weather events. And then for real estate professionals, it's making sure that when they're engaging with people who've got some damage on their property, there's nothing to say that those properties can't sell. You just got to make sure that everybody's got all the information that they need, that the right disclosures are in place, that the right clauses are in place in contracts. But those things are absolutely happening. I was speaking to the Insurance Council maybe a month ago, and they shared with me some really interesting numbers, and that the insurance claims for Cyclone Gabrielle, half of them were in Auckland. And I think when we look at the coverage that we've seen, the really scary, big news stories about devastation were very much in the Hawke's Bay, but half of all of the damage to property happened in Auckland. And I think, that will continue to be a real challenge for some of these markets. And we'll see some changes as new infrastructure is built over time. Those sorts of things start to change the nature of real estate in those different areas. But that takes time.
I'm just controlling my dog right now. So I do have a quick another question for you. There is a few questions coming in now, but I have one. Now, Ashley Church, your friend Ashley Church, now I wonder what your thinking is around this. So he was talking about, he's done a lot of diving into the data and seeing, we've been around that whole 10-year cycle. He sort of dove into the data and says, there's been a very definitive 10-year cycles, and it's almost 100% 10-year cycles for the last sort of 40 years or so, or since he's been looking at the data. Not that he's that old, but anyway. But he said, interestingly, more recently, it's been a 12-year cycle. And then he said, and looking to the future, if we're looking 10, 20 years on, he said, potentially that may evolve into sort of a 15-year cycle. And he said, certainly isn't necessarily a bad thing, as we all know, with, sustainability of housing prices in New Zealand and people being able to afford to buy their own home. What do you think about that? I know that the data doesn't lie, but do you have any thoughts about that?
I probably have lots of thoughts about that, and I haven't given it an enormous amount of thought. I trust the data that he's got in front of him. I think that this is the affordability conversation that we've been having in New Zealand for a really long time, and the rising prices works really nicely if you're trying to build a bit of an equity nest egg for yourself, but where does that leave future generations? And that, I think that's where, we're starting to see some really significant lifestyle shifts for New Zealanders long term because of the changes in prices. One being intensification, and just the fact that, not everybody is going to be able to afford a separated house anymore. It's just not where we're going to be going in New Zealand, particularly in those larger cities. And actually, from not just affordability of the houses for consumers, but the affordability of the infrastructure required for the amount of houses that are needed for a population that's going to grow like New Zealand's population is going to grow, we absolutely have to go up. And so, those changes in terms of the style of house that we live in, I think that will continue. And also, Renting. That more and more New Zealanders will rent for the long term. And so, private landlords have such an important role to play in the provision of houses for New Zealanders for the long term. And there are plenty of landlords out there that have rented a property to the same person for decades. And that is likely to become more usual as people never get off that rental ladder and stay where they are. And that will be a function of the economy and affordability of new houses. I think overlaying that, I think there's these challenges around the actual cost of new builds that, we still have a supply challenge in New Zealand. And, you project out 10, 20, 30 years, that problem is not going away. And where are we at in terms of actually solving that supply challenge? Well, we are going to continue to be challenged in that space. And gone are the days when you can build a whole load of really cheap apartments in towns. I mean, that just doesn't happen anymore, given the cost of all of the construction supplies, but the actual, cost of land, the cost of all of the different compliance and the seismic engineering and all of these things that have to happen now. So, actually adding significant density and significant amounts of stock to New Zealand will be an ongoing challenge, I think. And that will put pressure on the affordability equation as well.
Yeah, super interesting. You say that. We did a little while ago, actually, when they had the proposals in for the medium density rules. We talked to a planner, Michael Campbell, and Foss Shanahan from Rico, and they were just they were saying about in many other countries, going up is exactly what they're doing, and they're building communities around terrace housing and whatnot. And certainly Foss was saying that there's certainly an appetite for that in New Zealand. And I know I've got some teenagers who going through uni and finishing school and whatnot, and I certainly feel like they're probably not going to have the quarter acre dream, and whether they even want that, whether they even want property ownership. And you touched again on rental, and we've talked to many guests on the webinar about rentals and about there is landlords do play a crucial role, and 95% of landlords are great, 95% of tenants are great. Landlords play a crucial role, even your mum and dad investors, and that end of the scale plays a crucial role in putting roofs over people's houses. And it's it's a service, and it's a customer based service. So
and I think the other element to this too is that I'm going to judge the front of your house by the roof of your the room that you're in. But as you get older, you are going to want less and less to repaint that roof and less to mow those lawns. And so maybe you are the one that's going to move into a no/low maintenance apartment downtown, so that you can walk to the theatre and whatever else you're going to do, and your kids are going to move into your house. As much as younger people are saying, do I really want a lifetime of debt, and is this how I want to live? Older people are also saying, I don't want to be a gardener when I get old. I want to be a traveller, or whatever else people are choosing to do with their lives. That older demographic are making different property choices now because those choices are available to them. And I think that change will be interesting.
Absolutely. Feel slightly judged, but
it's a very nice room.
As I look out on my massive lawn. Yeah, absolutely. And look, we've already had a child go flatting and then come home again. And so look, we're certainly in that stage where at some point, probably not for probably a decade, because they always come back, so I hear. At some point we probably will look to downsize. We've got 5-bedroom and lots of kids and cats and dogs and everything. So you're completely right. Hey, let's jump over into some questions here, Frankie. Do you want to take the lead on some questions we've got there, and then we'll look to wrap up?
Yeah, cheers. Thank you. I do have a question here from David, just speaking about 2021 prices, and we've had a couple of people reply to him. What do you think about that, Jen?
Oh my goodness. If I had a crystal ball and I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't need to have a job. So I like Sean's answer, a pandemic. If we hadn't, that would be really interesting. If we had another pandemic, would would the same situation happen, or would we know enough to change some of those dynamics, and so it would have a different impact on our economy? Who knows the answer to that? And Kaz's answer: change of government plus 6 months to roll back laws. Look, I think it's the certainty of some of those changes. Like, what government are we going to get? What laws are they going to change or not change in spaces that impact in property? Where are we going to land from an interest rate perspective? When is inflation going to be under control? What's going to happen with the jobs market? When will that start being certain again? And also, are we really going to see this many people moving to New Zealand for the longer term, or is what's happened in the last 6 months an anomaly? With all of those things quite uncertain, and some time to go before we'll see some proper trends in pretty much all of those spaces. Your guess, David, is as good as mine.
I love that. And, I often say this on a webinar that, economists and commentators and whatnot are right 50% of the time. So,
That's very generous.
Isn't it? And I love that. Hey, let's look to wrap up. We're at 35 minutes, and I know you're a very, very busy woman, Jen, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. As a wrap up, this will be downloaded onto our YouTube channel, and you will be sent a link for a replay once all of the mechanics of that have happened. So again, thank you very much for joining us. You go away and have a wonderful Anzac weekend up and down the country, everybody. Thank you, Frankie, for joining me as my co-host, and we look forward to talking to you maybe in the spring or maybe in the summer, and see what's happened. Or maybe after the election. Let's see what happens after the election.
Indeed.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jen. See you
Thank
guys.
you.
See ya.